and welcome back. This is the Evolve Artist Block 2 second assignment where we actually get to pick our own or set up our own still lives and then paint them instead of painting things that we've been tracing, which was all of Block 1. But in Block 2 now we're setting up our own still lives, deciding what we're going to paint. And it's kind of tricky sometimes figuring out something that looks aesthetically pleasing, it looks nice to the eye, but isn't too complicated. So they gave us some guidelines when they were telling us what kinds of objects to paint. And in the first few paintings, they want us to stick with things that are simple, nothing too crazy, geometric shapes, simple fruits, that kind of thing. So for me, I added some extra guidelines for myself. One was that I wanted to paint more boxes, because especially boxes at an angle, because when we were doing the drawing assignments earlier on, I found that I'm not so good with boxes, so I need more practice with these shapes. So I decided I have a little rectangular box for an ocarina, and so I decided to stick that in there. And then another guideline that I gave myself is I want to try to do paper art, so mostly origami, and that's why you see in here we've got this origami heart. And then I was like, okay, 2 objects is not enough. Usually an odd number, 3. 3 is a good number, you know. 3 is the Trinity, and then you've often got like the rule of 3 in writing. Like 3 is just a good number. So I decided to go, for my third object, decided to go with this small squash thingamabob, which is, it's not a perfect circle or square or cone, like a perfect geometric object, and yet it is fairly symmetrical. So it's not too difficult for me to draw, because we want to, after doing the drawing part of things, we want to also be able to continue figuring out where the shadows and the lights are, where the gradients are supposed to be, that sort of thing. We're not worrying about reflections and highlights at this step, we're just laying down the colors. And it wasn't until, I really struggled with whether or not that heart, like one side of it is in the light, one side of it is in shadow, and I was thinking, is that an extreme shadow or a moderate shadow? And I struggled about it, and then I finally decided on extreme shadow. But now that I look back on it, should have been moderate shadow. It's a little too dark. The contrast between one half of the heart and the other half is just a little too extreme. And then later I also made another mistake with the squash. As you can see, I laid down the whole right side of that squash in moderate shadow, and I should have just left it that way, but later on I changed my mind, which I shouldn't have. It's like those people who take, not those people, I do the same thing. It's like when you take a test, a multiple choice test, and then you're like, okay, I'm pretty sure the answer is A. And then you go back and review your answers at the end, and you're like, oh, is it really A? I think maybe it's C. And then you change it to C. And then you submit the test, and you're like, oh, shoot, I think I made a mistake. And then you get the test back, and sure enough, you made a mistake. You should have left it at A, and you didn't, because you second guessed yourself. That's exactly what happened in this painting later on, as you shall see. But anyway, so I decided to go with 3 objects, 1 organic object, so we've got a squash, 1 paper object, we've got the heart, and then a box. And part of the reason for the heart is actually, when I was doing my research for before I signed up for Evolve Artist and was looking at some of the things that other students had done in the past, I was super impressed when I saw this one student did a couple of paper cranes and a paper cup upside down or something like that. And I was like, that is amazing. I want to paint paper cranes. But paper cranes are a little bit, a little advanced. So I decided to save the paper crane thing for later, the complex origami for later, and start with some simple origami. So we just start with the heart. And the heart is simple to make and simple to paint. So that's what I did. Although, it was slightly tricky getting all of those angles to work okay. It still looks a slightly tiny bit off, but it's okay. Okay, so here's where I started to make the mistake. I was like, there's a really big reflection on the bottom of the squash. I probably should paint that in there, and I should not have done that because we were not supposed to be doing reflections and highlights just yet. So that was a big mistake. And then also it looked weird at the end too. So yeah, don't second guess yourself. Just follow what Kevin says in the videos and leave it at that. Anyways, so, and then there are a few more gradients in here. We've got the gradient on the squash. We've got some gradients on the shadows on the box. And then of course the gradient on the heart. And the rest of it is pretty straight. Oh, and the stem of the squash as well. And the rest of it is pretty straightforward. So anyways, that was the big lesson that I learned in doing this assignment, this particular assignment, and then submitting it and getting feedback is don't second guess yourself. Follow the rules. Don't get ahead of yourself either and start putting in things that you're not supposed to put in. Sometimes it's good to just follow exactly what they tell you to do, especially when you don't really know what you're doing because you're a complete beginner. You might as well listen to the teacher and people who know what they're doing. So there's that. Aside from that unfortunate decision at the end, and also the choice of the shadow on the heart, I thought this turned out fairly okay for a second still life drawing. I used to not understand why people spent so much time doing still lives of fruits and vegetables and plants and things. I was like, that's so boring. But once you actually dig into the painting yourself and you realize how much is going on in terms of light and shadow and gradients and edges and how all of these things interplay, you start to appreciate these things a lot more. That's one of the fun things about learning art and learning it at a fairly intense level, is that you learn to appreciate other art and artists a lot more, because a lot of the things that you thought, oh, that's easy, that's simple, you realize, no, it's not that easy. It's not that simple. For example, it's not that easy to draw a straight line with paint. You know, that's one of the reasons why I keep making myself do a border around my paintings, because I want to keep practicing making those straight lines. Like to this day, even though at this point I've gone through over 30 paintings now, I'm still not the best at straight lines or gradients for that matter, which is not to be, not surprising, because after all, I'm a beginner, but it just makes you appreciate that much more when other people do really good straight lines and so on and so forth. So anyway, there you have it. That is assignment, I was about to say assignment 2. It's actually assignment 12, but it's the second painting in block 2. And continue to make and enjoy beautiful things. I'll see you in the next video.